So I'm doing the Nixon documentary. Um, the two parts right now go to his election as vice president, and Vance is hoping to get elected VP this November, or rather in a few, Jesus, not even 2 weeks. And there's an article by Politico that I thought was interesting for that reason, and it's called "J.D. Vance is Donald Trump's Spiro Agnew." Why Donald Trump selected Senator J.D. Vance as his running mate is still unknown. What did Trump see in Vance, who once called the former president America's Hitler and unfit for the presidency? And what caused this transformation? Assuming Congress and the states do not repeal the 22nd Amendment to allow presidents to serve more than 2 terms, Vance will likely be the Republican frontrunner for president in 2028. Trump must believe that with the proper guidance and mentorship, Vance could be a successful president. But aside from his children, Trump has managed to avoid having any proteges rise to high office. In fact, the number of former senior officials Trump chose to serve in his first administration, including his vice president, who are now in strong opposition to his reelection, should be instructive. If one fast forwards to 2027, when presidential candidates will be announcing, Vance will almost certainly be one of them. Clearly, his ambition will be an issue. From Vance's perspective, should Trump win, actual actorial tables show there is some probability he will not complete his term in office. In the worst case, that could make Vance president or acting president. Unless Vance offends his benefactor, he would be in the post position for 2028. The last president to dump his vice president was Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who had three: John Nance Gardner, Henry A. Wallace, and Harry S. Truman. Barack Obama is a more current example in which he preferred Hillary Clinton to follow him rather than his vice president Joe Biden. So there is some precedent for Trump to reverse course, especially if he sees his own interests conflicting with Vance's late in his second term. Trump, of course, may have had other motivations for choosing Vance, as opposed to a more recognizable ally such as Nikki Haley or Senators Tim Scott or Tom Cotton. That motivation could have derived from a little history and Richard Nixon's 1968 campaign. Whom did Nixon choose as his vice president? Most Americans will not recall Spiro Agnew, the disgraced former governor of Maryland. Agnew had a modest resume, serving as a Maryland county executive and governor, until he was selected to become the nation's 39th vice president. The FBI subsequently investigated Agnew for bribery, extortion, taking kickbacks, and tax fraud. In 2000, man, that's a big error on my part. In 1973, after months of claiming innocence, Agnew pleaded guilty to one count of tax evasion and resigned. One reason Nixon had selected Agnew was as an insurance policy against potential impeachment and conviction, removing him from the presidency. Simply put, who would accept Agnew as president in the middle of the Cold War and with Vietnam still raging? Had Agnew and not Gerald Ford been vice president in 1974, would Nixon have resigned over Watergate? If he had been impeached, would the Senate have convicted him? Those would have been interesting questions. In Trump's thinking, lawfare is responsible for his conviction in New York on 34 counts of bookkeeping violations. Suppose he is given jail time. Three other cases against him remain. While a judge has dismissed classified documents case on the grounds that the special counsel's selection was unconstitutional, that almost certainly will be reversed. Based on the public record, Trump must be worried that he will be convicted in the trial of wrongful possession of highly classified material. The cases over fomenting the January 6th riot that occupied Congress and Georgia's election interference and obstruction charges against Trump seem strong. The president's pardon powers only apply to federal and not to state courts in Georgia or New York. With Vance as vice president, does the Spiro Agnew apply? Does the Spiro Agnew model apply? In the Senate, where Vance was not popular with everyone, is a convicted Trump better in the White House than a young, unpopular vice president? One can wonder, but of all the reasons why Trump picked Vance from a fairly robust bench, an insurance policy makes some sense. That would not extricate Trump from his legal issues if he is elected president and then convicted in at least one of the three cases he faces. Still, with more than a whiff of lineage between Nixon's choice of Agnew and Trump's choice of Vance, the notion of an insurance policy and antidote against conviction by the Senate must have some merit. Think about that if Trump wins, the legal case against him proceed. As I've been working on part three, and it's just kind of just going over the whole Eisenhower-Nixon relationship. One of the things that Eisenhower believed of Nixon was that he was too immature to be president. He was the second youngest VP, after all, in all of American history. In the case of Trump and Vance, I think there is some water to the idea because Trump, like, okay, crazy stuff. The Democrats talk about he's going to tear up the Constitution. All these different, dictator comments and fomenting. But it's not like they like Vance. Pence is someone who I truly believe like if you put the Democrats in a position to remove Trump from office, they probably would have been okay with as president. Because aside from his extremely just backwards, archaic beliefs about LGBT rights and really anything else relating to social issues, they would still see him as someone who they could trust to keep up, whatever military interventions we have overseas. He doesn't really shake things up at all. He's kind of just he is Trump without the mean tweets and a lot of the crazier comments. With Vance, you have a guy who, like, people always they talk about Harris being this chameleon, right? And she is someone who has shifted her positions here and there. Trump has as well. Trump went from supporting single payer health care to now calling it socialism. So he's flipped and flopped too. But a lot of the stuff they get Vance for, the childless cat ladies comment, right? Like attacking the what was it, the president of the teachers union for not having children and leave ours alone. Just all types of little weird stuff that comes out of his mouth that is really off-putting to Democrats, to where they might sit there and go, Trump is stupid, but I don't want that other maniac in here. And I guess that is the idea, that you get a VP who is the worst of you. Trump is charismatic. Vance is not. Trump is someone who can at least appear to be movable on issues. Vance is movable if it means advancing his career. Um, there's really no benefit to having Vance over Trump at all. Like, if you're a Democrat, I really don't see what you get out of having that guy as your president. I just don't see what positives he has over Trump. And that's saying that as someone who really can't stand either one of them. Like, this article talks about Agnew, and I guess the one thing they're kind of leaving out there is that back then, in '68, there was this idea that you needed to have a political experience to be accepted as a viable candidate. I mean, the only president in modern times that before Trump that was elected without holding some office was Eisenhower, and even then that's like just extreme military experience. But there was this idea that you needed to have some understanding of world affairs, and that's a big part of the reason why, if you look at the '68 tickets, you have Nixon, a former senator, former vice president, former congressman, paired with Agnew, who was former governor, but still no international, and he was in no position to have had like foreign policy experience. And then you look at Humphrey and Muskie, who both had been senators and kind of just were very much of the same belief, like just had that same thing. So that is something that's left out of the article, that times have changed, and a lot of the same requirements that people thought you needed to be able to have these offices are not applicable. But I don't put it past Trump that he selected Vance just for the sake of making sure Democrats think twice about trying to get rid of him. And I don't even think they would be able to. Like, I think we're in all likelihood, if they're able to somehow miraculously keep the House and Senate, or rather get the House and then retain the Senate for the entire theoretical second term of his that we might get in a few months, I really don't see a scenario where they are able to convict him. They might impeach him again for the third time. I'm not going to rule that one out. But unless Trump is given jail time, or which I don't think will happen either. Basically, I just don't see a scenario where you end up with Vance as president outside of Trump either having an illness or some other crazy person, which I hope does not, but some crazy person does something, and it's just not a scenario I see playing out. But that is mostly due to the incompetence of Democrats and the fact that there's a lot of them who just don't want to run the risk of Vance. They may not like Trump, but they don't like the idea of Vance as his successor any more than anyone else does.